This is Sell It or Shelve It, the series where I finally check out unwatched titles in my collection and decide if they're worthy of sticking around or kicking them to the curb. We all have unwatched movies in the collection, and I'm making it my mission to separate the best from the rest. And in the process, maybe we can also learn a little something along the way.
You're sure you won't have a sandwich?
Pardon?
Psycho 3 is directed by and stars Anthony Perkins and was released in 1986, and Psycho 4 stars Anthony Perkins and was released in 1990 and was directed by Mick Garris. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Sell It or Shelve It, episode 5, I believe. Today we're doing something a little different, talking about Psycho 3 and Psycho 4 today. Now, the Psycho franchise is interesting because a lot of people probably don't even know that there's a Psycho franchise. Everybody knows the first Psycho movie. It's a big popular movie, but a lot of people don't know that there is a 2 and a 3 and a 4. There's also a shot-for-shot remake directed by Gus Van Sant, and a really good TV show as well called Bates Motel that I'm a fan of. But today we're focusing on these two movies. Prior to today, I had seen Psycho 2, which I really liked. That one is really solid. Probably the best of the bunch. Obviously second to the original. But it's a way better movie than it has any right being, and it really took a lot of people by surprise, I think, including myself. So yeah, after the original came out, all these years later, in the 80s, when 80s slashers were getting super big, they were like, hey, what do we got? What IP do we own? And they dug up Psycho, and they were like, fuck it, let's make a sequel to Psycho. Doesn't sound like the best idea on paper, but Psycho 2, unfortunately we're not talking about that movie today. Psycho 2 is really good. I really enjoy that movie. So with that being said, I assumed that 3 and 4 would most likely be a case of diminishing returns because, it's crazy enough that Psycho 2 is as good as it is, so there's no way that 3 and 4 can be that good, right? Well, don't worry, we'll get to that. So yeah, I grabbed both of these off of Amazon for pretty cheap when I saw that they, existed, and, I wanted to check them out and figured why not, let me grab them. They're Scream Factory. That's a label that back in the day I used to collect a lot for. If it had the Scream Factory logo on the spine, I was probably going to buy it regardless of the quality. And that's how we got into this situation that we're in today, where we're trying to get rid of some of these. So yeah, there have been re-releases of these. There's like a box set that you can get of all 4 movies on Blu-ray. And then just this past year, Arrow did a box set of all 4 on 4K, which was cool. I was tempted to buy that, but I already own all of these on Blu-ray, and since I hadn't seen these yet at that point, I wasn't going to go ahead and buy that Arrow 4K box set, despite it looking really cool and hearing about good transfers and all that fun stuff. So yeah, let's talk about Psycho 3 first. That is a movie that, to me, after watching it, it really felt like it was kind of running back the same plays as Psycho 2. Just to lay it out on the table, I think Psycho 3 was a bit of a step down from Psycho 2. What I will say is this, the Psycho franchise oddly has a lot of lore to pull from. And what's cool about it is, canonically, in the context of the movies, the gap between the first movie and the second movie, which was the 60s and the 80s, so a roughly 20-year span, makes sense because in the film timeline, Norman Bates has been in jail that whole time for the murders of the original movie. And Psycho 2, I believe, begins with him being released. And that whole movie is about him trying to introduce himself into society. And he's doing his best to kind of, get back into a normal life. He just wants to live and, put everything in the past. But the town won't really let him. And, he has nowhere else to go because he just goes back to the motel because he owns it still, and it doesn't make sense for him to go anywhere else. So that movie is actually, I wish I was talking about Psycho 2 today, because that movie is really cool and it deals with a lot of really cool ideas. And Psycho 3 picks up right where at the end of Psycho 2, where, spoiler alert, he kills this lady called Mrs. Spool, I believe is her name, who is like claiming to be his real mother. It's this whole thing. So Psycho 3, he's like dealing with the fallout of the end of Psycho 2. Pretty cool conceptually. Psycho 3 also deals with the inclusion of this character named Maureen, which sounds a lot like Marion. And that's intentional because she also happens to look a lot like Marion from the original film. So, you know, that is kind of thrown into the mix as this object for him to fixate on, which is like directly tied back to those memories that he's so desperately been trying to, you know, get past. So like he sees her as like something that he needs to stay away from because that's like temptation to him, right? So there's some interesting dynamic there. And then there's this other guy who comes around and he's like this drifter and he gets a job working at the motel. And, you know, he's trying to, the dude's just a piece of shit, basically. He's like trying to take advantage of Norman, trying to take advantage of Maureen. So they're the three main characters and they have their whole dynamic where there's like a push and pull between the three of them. And it's really, it's not that interesting of a story, if I'm being honest. All of the most compelling questions about what it would be like if Norman Bates was released 20 years later were all addressed in Psycho 2, and this just kind of feels like more of the same. There's really not a lot to it. Frankly, I don't see myself watching this one again. Spoiler alert, but there's a very good chance that that this will not be sticking around. So moving on to Psycho 4, in the wake of Psycho 3, that movie went on to become the most least profitable in the entire franchise. So, as is known to happen, Psycho 4 was a straight-to-TV movie. This one's directed by Mick Garris, who is noteworthy on this channel specifically as his film Sleepwalkers from 1992 was the subject of my very first video. And in that movie, there is a incestuous relationship between a seemingly teenage boy and his mother. And in Psycho 4, there is some heavily implied... I mean, Psycho, the nature of Psycho anyway, is there's a weird relationship between Norman and his mother. It's not quite incestuous, but it's like, it's borderline. And Psycho 4 really dives deep into some of that stuff. There's like this scene where Norman Bates' mom is like afraid of a thunderstorm and she like wants him to get into bed with her to like comfort her, but his clothes are all wet, so she makes him take his clothes off. It's bizarre. It's super bizarre. And it's just funny that Mick Garris didn't write Sleepwalkers, Stephen King did. And so it's just funny that two of his first movies, I believe, I think they might be his first two movies. Actually, no, I think he did Critters 2 prior. Regardless, the fact that he has two movies where this sort of incestuous mother-son plotline is so prominent, if I didn't know it was a coincidence, I would be looking at Mick Garris kind of like with a side eye. Like, what are you into, bro? What's going on? So yeah, Psycho 4, meh. You know, Psycho 4, it's a TV movie, and there are great TV movies, but it shows in the production, and the story itself feels like sort of them just kind of spinning their wheels in some attempt at wringing the Psycho sponge out for all it's worth and just kind of, you know, milking, you know, blood from a stone sort of deal. There's not a lot of gas left in the tank at this point. So Psycho 4 is about Norman Bates is calling into a radio station where they are discussing the topic of matricide, which is where you kill your mother. And Norman Bates is obviously compelled to call in and, you know, engage with them on the subject. And he sort of recounts to them, in the form of flashbacks that comprise the majority of the movie, significant events in his life where, you know, he had to do messed up things in the name of his mother and how it ultimately led to him killing her. And so what you have is just a series of flashbacks with a sort of wraparound segment. It's almost like an anthology film in that way, but and you know, it culminates in this sort of dramatic finale that's just, you know, pretty underwhelming. What I will say is that it's cool to see Olivia Hussey in the role of Norman's mother. She's always nice to see. And Norman Bates, Anthony Perkins himself, brings a real, you know, humanity to this role. He's a very likable guy. He has this sort of outward charm about him. And you can tell he really cares about this character. It's definitely, you know, something he's very passionate about, and it shows in the film. As cool of an idea of it as it is to kind of get a little bit of backstory about Norman Bates and how he became the way he is, and the dynamic he had with his mother when she was still alive I feel it was done so much better in the Bates Motel TV show, despite some of the problems that I have with that show. And, you know, perhaps it's a bit unfair to compare the two, but having seen both, I'm inclined to think that this is sort of a inferior version of those events. So ultimately, you know, this probably shouldn't have ever been a franchise, but that being said, we did get Psycho 2 out of it, and Psycho 2 is really good, and if there's any takeaway from this video, it's that you should definitely check out Psycho 2 if you haven't, because it's a lot better than you would probably expect it to be. These movies, Psycho 3 and 4, there's fun to be had, but are they required viewing? No. Are they gonna blow your mind? Probably not. Is it cool to see a movie directed by Anthony Perkins? Yeah, it's pretty cool. If you like Mick Garris, like I do, it's cool to check this one out, but it's far from his best movie, and it's far from the best Psycho movie. Psycho 3 and 4, I'm gonna sell these. I'll probably sell them as like a double pack on eBay or something like that, to get rid of them both, kill two birds with one stone. You know, the goal of this series is to watch these movies that I've been putting off, see if they're worthy of sticking around, and if they're not, getting rid of them. And that's what I want to do, is free up shelf space. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions, because do I want to get rid of these movies? Not necessarily. You know, like if I had my own house, my own whole, you know, a big multiple rooms to have this collection live in, yeah, I probably wouldn't feel the need to. But, you know, eventually one day I'm gonna have to move, and I'm gonna have to put all these movies in like a bunch of fucking totes and shit. And, you know, the less there are, the better. And honestly, I want my collection to be quality. I don't want to just have Psycho 3 and 4 for the sake of having Psycho 3 and 4, because realistically, I'm probably not going to watch these movies ever again. And, you know, I like to end these videos a little bit with some of that psychology behind, you know, collecting and stuff. And, you know, I find this to be the most fascinating part of the topic and the discussion, is like, why hang on to that movie that you're not going to watch again? I think it's something we should be talking about more. And it's my favorite thing to talk about, because it's so often overlooked. And like, don't ask that person why they bought this movie that they're never going to watch. It's like, well, why not? It's like, shouldn't we be holding ourselves accountable? You know, is it really necessary to have all this stuff? I don't know. I think it's an interesting topic. It's something I am endlessly fascinated by. And frankly, I think it's sort of the niche that I am occupying right now. I'm at this stage in my collecting journey where I'm still bringing in new Blu-rays and 4Ks. I just bought Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island on Blu-ray. That was a big one. That had only had a DVD prior. I just got Dune 2 on 4K. So I'm still bringing stuff in, but I'm more focused right now on what can I get rid of? What can I take out of here? What can I get out of here, you know? All right, so that was Sell It or Shelve It, episode 5. Let me know what you think about Psychos 3 and 4. Do you love these movies? Is there some value that I missed in them? Please let me know. I'd love to hear your opinions on these movies. This isn't one of the more popular horror franchises, so I'd really be interested in hearing what people think of these movies. I don't really see them talked about a lot, so I feel pretty vindicated and, you know, trust that I'm making the right decision in getting rid of these, because, you know, frankly, they sat on the shelf for years before I watched them, and they would probably sit for another who knows how long until I watch them again, if ever. So I feel like I'm making the right call here. But yeah, the sell pile is growing. We will have titles where I do keep them, and that's the beauty of this series. It's a lot of fun finally getting the motivation to watch some of these movies and decide if I want to keep them or not. That's been the most entertaining part of this for me. Hopefully it's entertaining for you, so please feel free to leave recommendations as to how I could make this series more appealing to you, the viewer. So yeah, with that being said, please take care and watch more movies. Maybe even some unwatched movies as well.